Good afternoon, Secretary General, President, assembled guests, distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for having me here. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be able to address you on the subject of the importance of international collaboration and partnerships in the development of transnational law. Before I start, though, allow me to pause and use this occasion to what the meeting truly calls for. And on behalf of the World Bank Group, our warmest and most heartfelt congratulations to UNIDROIT on this occasion of its centenary. 100 years, 100 years. It's a magnificent achievement, an entire century built on refining and sustaining legal foundations of international commerce. A century of bringing together legal traditions, civil law, common law, developed and developing, and finding that in dialogue, principles that transcend any single system. A century of demonstrating through patient and rigorous work that law can be a common language across the most profound differences of culture, history, and economic circumstance. This is no small achievement in a world that has seen the rise and fall of empires, world wars, global pandemics. UNIDROIT has not only endured and grown more relevant, authoritative, and trusted, it's the truest measure of international excellence. UNIDROIT has convened this gathering, I hope, not only to celebrate, but to kick off another century as a serious discussion of how to do more and do better through stronger partnerships. I want to speak today about something that sits at the very heart of both our institutions' mandates: the urgent need to accelerate law reforms in developing countries to unlock private sector development, and the equally urgent case for international organizations to work together more systemically in pursuit of that objective. For those less familiar with the World Bank Group, let me say a word about what it is that we do, because the framing of remarks today is based largely about the law reforms and private investment that we're doing and the way we see it in the world of development. The World Bank is one of the largest sources of development finance, technical expertise, and knowledge in the world. Founded in 1944, we're only 82 years old. We're an international treaty-based organization consisting of 189 member countries with a single animating mission: to eradicate extreme poverty on a livable planet. Our focus now is jobs and the jobs agenda, and we've defined that engagement in 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is foundational infrastructure. Infrastructure is critical to job creation. Traditional infrastructure like roads, electricity, and digital access to human infrastructure like healthcare, nutrition, education, and skilling. Pillar 2 is government policy making. Policy making that is thoughtfully aligned with development goals and includes law and regulatory systems that establish business-friendly investment environments that underpin investor confidence and encourage business creation, investment, and expansion. And Pillar 3 is private sector investment and engagement and mobilization. We've also identified 5 sectors that have the biggest potential for driving growth and jobs: infrastructure, agriculture, healthcare, tourism, and value-added manufacturing. These are the sectors that we've seen time and again generate enormous job creation and are the ones in which we're investing enormous resources to continuously develop diagnostics, analyses, knowledge, and expertise. 90% of jobs in the developing world are made and created and maintained in the private sector, and 60% are in micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. But this job agenda also comes with a sense of urgency. Over the coming decade, 1.2 billion young people will come to working age in economies that were expected to produce less than half of those jobs. That gap, that shortfall, presents frightening consequences for the economy and for society. But meeting even the modest development goals of these countries will cost emerging economies approximately 5% of their GDP per year, and almost 8% in low-income countries. That price tag runs to the trillions of dollars and is prohibitive if governments or international financial institutions must bear it alone. And yet no amount of public financing from national budgets or institutions like ours and our partners can substitute for the scale and dynamism needed from the private sector, invested in these job-creating industries, sectors, and businesses. And that's why successful development policies must encourage private companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and lenders to invest their capital, technology, and know-how in job-producing sectors. These investors look for market opportunities, but opportunities that are supported by clear rules and predictable outcomes that provide stability, manage risk, and ensure a likelihood of a reasonable return on those investments. International investors and lenders especially, like commercial banks and institutional investors, require certain preconditions to their investment based on their experience and perceptions of global standards, market practices, and long-established benchmarks. They're looking for consistency of laws and alignment of practices. And that's where our collaboration is most important. The challenge for us is to create a legal ecosystem of policies, laws, regulations, systems, and governments that together enact, implement, and apply laws and regulations fairly, efficiently, consistently, predictably, transparently, ethically, and with accountability. It is critical then for emerging economies to create this legal ecosystem in order to boost investor confidence in a business-friendly investment environment with clear rules and predictable outcomes, managed by institutions of government, administrative, regulatory, and judicial, with competence and integrity. This is also where UNIDROIT's mission to develop international standards and benchmarks is of paramount importance, consistent with a better compliance and risk mitigation, and leading to development outcomes that alleviate poverty. For 100 years, UNIDROIT has recognized what we at the World Bank have also come to understand and embrace. Legal fragmentation is a barrier to opportunity and negatively affects investment, job creation, and development. Our collaboration with UNIDROIT is long-standing and deeply operational. Over the years, UNIDROIT instruments and principles have guided many World Bank-supported reforms, informed our policy advice to client countries, and strengthened the legal capacity in countries across income levels and regions. Let me highlight just a few areas where our partnership has been especially consequential. Perhaps the most visible area of current collaboration is in the evolving landscape of carbon markets and the climate-related finance. As countries and market participants seek to scale both voluntary and compliance in carbon markets, legal questions become central. UNIDROIT's work on legal characterization of verified carbon credits has provided a timely and principled foundation for these discussions. And just last week, our legal team launched a legal and regulatory reform toolkit for high-integrity carbon markets, practical, adaptable guidance to help governments build the legal foundations that turn climate commitments into real bankable projects. This toolkit is aimed at helping policymakers and legislatures define carbon rights and eligible activities, monitoring, reporting, verification, and regulating transactions, and enabling enforcement. Another example is the secured transactions and access to finance. The UNIDROIT FAO and EFAD legal guide on contract and farming and UNIDROIT's work on secured transactions have directly informed World Bank's legal and technical assistance in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. When small farmers or MSMEs can use mobile assets, crops, equipment, and receivables as collateral, they can access the credit they need to grow. We have another common endeavor in the area of collaboration on standardized procurement documents and contract reform. This is an enormous area that is also politically charged in the common atmosphere, and is one that is ongoing, immediate, and critically important. Another big opportunity is the connection to the MDB partnership. The World Bank works closely with other multilateral development banks to align procurement policies to develop common master procurement documents The collaboration with UNIDROIT on SPDs could also inform better processes across the MDB network. There are many more examples of our collaborations, and I won't belabor them now, but the Cape Town Convention on Asset-Based Finance, UNIDROIT Principles of International Commerce are just a few. Here's a few more that are urgently needed and require more attention. And one is infrastructure concession and public-private partnerships. Public finance depends on predictable legal frameworks, as I mentioned, but particularly in concession agreements, sovereign risk allocation, and investor protection. At the World Bank, we've launched the so-called Mission 300, a program to bring electricity to 300 million Africans by 2030. This audacious program requires PPPs with private players bringing technology, know-how, and capital, but it depends on standardized banking frameworks that do not exist in most of Africa, and it's a major constraint to infrastructure investment and to the success of this program. Secured transactions, movable collateral frameworks, insolvency and restructuring, digital assets and fintech, fair, effective, and predictable dispute resolution systems. There's so much to do. I could go on for the rest of your afternoon. But let me turn to what I believe is the most important part of my remarks. A few recommendations that I humbly offer on how international organizations can work more effectively together to support law reforms in furtherance of a common mission of development. While our individual mandates may differ, our objectives converge. In a world of constrained resources and enormous development needs, the case for systemic cooperation has never been stronger. Currently, cooperation between international organizations on law reforms can be described as a bit ad hoc, a project by project and dependent on individual initiatives. But we can and we must do better. So I would recommend the creation of a standing mechanism, a regular convening of the legal teams of UNIDROIT, the World Bank, UNCITRAL, UN Trade and Development, regional development banks, and other relevant institutions to map out our respective programs, identify overlaps and gaps, and coordinate joint initiatives. Such a mechanism need not be overly bureaucratic. A twice-yearly working session supported by a shared knowledge platform could significantly improve coordination and overcome a sometimes fragmented approach to our work. Could also avoid some of the duplication of effort that we commonly come across. Second, I'd note that law reforms imposed from the outside rarely stick. What makes this partnership so enduring and what distinguishes the best of UNIDROIT's work is the recognition that law evolves through adaptation, not transplantation. And while we work through principles designed to allow flexibility for national perspectives and circumstances, while safeguarding coherence, consistency, and trust. And so I'd recommend that the international organizations invest more systemically in building domestic legal reform capacity that allows countries to absorb and adapt international standards and instruments on their own terms. This means supporting law officials in developing countries, including attorneys general, law reform commissions, legal institutions of education, and parliamentary drafting offices in developing countries. The World Bank is committed to expanding this work, and we see UNIDROIT as a natural partner in curriculum development, training, and regional networks of law reforms. Earlier this month, our legal team had the privilege of convening attorneys general and ministers of justice from 9 countries across Africa in Rwanda to discuss precisely what I've described, the need for laws that promote private sector investment and the need for the attorneys general not only to support it or lead it, but to take ownership of that adjustment. And when we show them the data-driven and analytics that we create to support that type of work and the pathway to results, they were overwhelmingly enthusiastic about such a role. So let's do this together. We can use the best of our convening power to bring together relevant government officials and help further the implementation of that last mile. Distinguished colleagues, the work we do in this room and the institutions that we represent matters now more than ever. The jobs agenda and the investment required to support it may succeed or fail, largely on the success of our collective ability to set the legal foundations precisely through the work that you've been doing for 100 years. Unidroit has spent a century demonstrating that fair, predictable, and coherent private law is foundation to economic cooperation, sustainable development, and peace. And the World Bank has spent nearly 80 years demonstrating that legal and institutional foundations are the prerequisite for growth, inclusion, and resilience. We share a mission and we share a conviction that law serves as a bridge between jurisdictions, between public and private sectors, and between vision and implementation. And we share a responsibility to make that bridge as strong and wide and as accessible as possible. But time is not on our side. The global economy is recovering from successive global shocks and losing momentum due to downturns even before the current geopolitical spillovers in the Middle East. We've got to ramp up the intensity, focus, and scale of our work, and I hope this celebration and renewed emphasis on partnerships and genuine collaboration creates lasting connections between our institutions to do so. As we look to the future, I hope this partnership will only deepen. The recommendation I've offered today are just an invitation to build more systemic, ambitious, and impactful collaborative in services of the countries and the communities that need it most. So thank you again. Congratulations and best wishes on the next 100 years.